A very pleasant good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Magandang umaga po, magandang tanghali, magandang hapon, magandang gabi. Whatever your time zone is and wherever you are located, welcome to the Chronicles, and this is Rita Gadi. This afternoon or this day, wherever your time zone is, we are going to discuss many concerns that affect our daily lives, but from another viewpoint, which is, of course, what affects us quite directly and also quite indirectly, but something which we have to discuss as clearly and as plainly as possible. Our guest for this afternoon is one of those rare minds that we can find this side of the planet. And for what it may be worth, it is important that we can get into an understanding of the different things that happen to our economy, to our finances, to the logistical efforts that are being done by our government, etc. And so I'd like to welcome the former member of the Board of Governors of the Central Bank of the Philippines. As I said, one of the rarest brilliant minds we can find this side of the planet, Mr. DIWA GUINIGUNDO. Good afternoon.
Hi, magandang hapon, Miss Gadi, at maraming salamat sa imbitasyon mo sa hapong ito. Thank you very much.
Yes, you can call me Rita at any time, sir.
Okay.
I picked up the title of our program from your column, Synchronicity, because it seems that when there are policy pronouncements, or if they are policy pronouncements, if there are executive orders, if there are programs that are being delivered in speeches. I think Junior Marcos delivers something like 3 speeches a day. So at any time he has, we have to catch up whether these are for policy, for programs, or whatever it is. But that's precisely it. Does it sink down to what the members of his executive are supposed to be doing after he makes some pronouncements? And does it also sync with us? So that's the question that we first have to tackle, sir.
Well, I was talking about when public policies are rushed and are not in sync with each other. So they tend to contradict each other, especially in terms of the impact. For one very good example is the recent passage of the law creating the Maharlika Investment Fund. So we wanted to invest, despite the fact that we don't have the usual windfall profits or surplus funds to talk of in the first place. But then Congress had passed it. The president has signed it. So we have to see to its implementation. So we are putting essentially all our eggs in that basket. However, there's another policy, and that was the provision of tax holidays on independent power producers. In other words, if you are engaged in the provision of power or energy, your liabilities, your tax liabilities with the local governments are not only reduced, but they are condoned. In other words, you get this kind of tax holidays or tax benefits. So that makes you quite excited about going into provision of energy to the Philippine economy. And the problem, of course, is that what does that leave the Maharlika Investment Fund? So instead of going into the Maharlika Investment Fund, some foreign investors would rather go to independent power being the provision of power, where you can take advantage of the benefits, particularly tax holidays, consisting of lower real estate property taxes, for example, or reduction or condonation of tax obligations. And that's quite retroactive. Retroactive in the sense that all of your payments previously, because of the tax holidays prescribed and given to the industry, it's still it's going to benefit you moving forward. So I think these are some of the things that we talk about when we say public policies should be at sync with each other.
Yeah.
The other point
Yeah.
that we can also cite, Rita, is about climate change, for example. Okay, climate change. We talk about the devastation of our forests and the ecosystem, but the implementation of some of our DNR policies, I think, should really be strengthened. No? We still see a lot of quarrying. We still see a lot of, along the waterways, you see a lot of residential houses, shacks, for example, and that can also affect the ecosystem. So I think some of these public policies will really have to be reconciled so that we move as one, and public policies are in sync with one another, so that government policies become more effective.
Exactly. That's very good that you pointed that out. Well, let's separate this so that we can discuss it even more extensively. You mentioned something about the statements, I mean, the policies regarding taxes, etc. and all. And then, of course, the investment fund, the Maharlika Investment Fund. I am also confused with the name they have for this. Some call it the Maharlika Sovereign Fund. And in other instances, even among the congressmen, they call it the Maharlika Investment Fund. But these are two words. And as a grammarian, I would think that investment is really far away from sovereign. So
That's
when you
right.
say it's a sovereign fund, what is an investment fund? That's one. Now let's get to that item that you were saying, like it has funds. Whether you can call it investment or sovereign, there ought to be funds. Exactly. So at least there's a common ground there. But these funds should be in sync with something. It is coming out of nothing because we don't have reserves. Do we have surplus? I mean, like sometimes some of the government officials talk about, oh yes, we have a lot of reserves, but is that part that will be going into the investment and sovereign fund? No, it isn't. So you're shaking your head. So out of nothing, we have this phrase of a Maharlika investment or sovereign fund, not from surplus, not from windfall profits, as you mentioned this also. So it's there. It's floating above us. That's the Maharlika Fund. And then you have this tax incentive, which are they trying to connect this? And that's exactly what we're trying to find out. Are they synchronizing this with the investments for Maharlika? No. This is something like an attractive, like some attraction for future investments, but not for the funds, not for the
That's right.
MIF fund.
That's right.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So that
It
is
will
where
take the funds away from Maharlika Investment Fund.
exactly.
Because
So
why should I invest if I'm a foreign investor with the Maharlika Investment Fund if this particular project, infrastructure project, for example, promises higher returns to me?
yeah.
Okay, you have tax benefits. There's condemnation of your tax liabilities to local government units. So why should I go into Maharlika Investment Fund? That's one good example, Rita. The other good example is we say that it's a sovereign investment fund. I think that's the right word. Sovereign wealth funds are based or are built on the basis of you have
The surplus.
windfall profits, surplus
Yeah,
funds,
yes.
etc. Like Norway, like Singapore, and even some African and Latin American countries with surplus funds from metal sales, from sale of public properties. Sovereign investment fund like the Maharlika Investment Fund is taken particularly from the budget, no? From the dividends of government financial institutions like Land Bank, and you have DBP, and of course the dividends coming from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, and those from PAGCOR. The problem is this. The proponents of Maharlika Investment Fund are saying we have surplus funds. In other words, we have unutilized funds. They must be referring to the loanable funds or investable funds of DBP and Land Bank. The problem there is that's not ours. That's not the government's.
Yes.
That's the deposit of the general public with both DBP and Land Bank.
Exactly.
So we cannot treat that as excess funds of the government that we can invest. Now, one good proof of that, Rita, is that in my previous column, I cited the fact that, number one, the government is borrowing at least $600 million from the World Bank. Second, the Bureau of the Treasury is also floating, $3 billion or $4 billion from for retail, dollar retail treasury bonds, which will be floated outside the Philippines. I mean, if we have surplus funds, we don't have to borrow, right?
Exactly.
But this is what we are doing right now. So people are confused. If we have surplus funds that convinces us to put up this Maharlika Investment Fund, why are we borrowing?
Why should we borrowing? Exactly. So
Why are we
they're
borrowing?
very clear that this is not being synchronized in such a manner that it is understandable. As Einstein
right.
said, if you have to explain it, then you really have to go over your theory all over again. Because it really has to be simplified. And the other
Yeah.
aspect here, sir, is the fact that, there was, it seemed that they had to rush this as though it was something so important. Now there are a lot of speculations regarding where it's coming, where the funds are going to come from. As you said, we don't have those surplus funds. And then there is this gray area where they say something like, the pensions of SSS and GSIS and whatever pensions are not going to be touched. But if they wish to invest this, then, they may. Even that is also not in sync. So
That's right. That's right, Rita. Because if you take a look at the congressional version, I mean the version of Congress,
yes.
okay, SSS and GSIS pension funds are included in that in the Maharlika Investment Fund. However, in the Senate version of Senator Villar, that was taken out. However, nothing prevents both SSS and GSIS as well as pension funds, meaning PhilHealth,
If they wish to
Philippine
invest.
Veterans Administration Office, from investing in the same projects or programs where Maharlika Investment Fund is going to invest. So in other
Exactly.
words,
Yes.
there's nothing in the law. There's nothing in the law that compels SSS and the other pension funds from investing in Maharlika Investment Fund. But nothing prevents them from going into the same program or projects that will be funded by Maharlika.
Precisely. That's where the gray, the use of semantics actually it plays around, because you have
That's right.
Secretary of Finance also doing his best to come up with a number of words put together that exactly means what we're talking about right now. Nothing prevents it from being invested. Nothing stops it from entering into investments with the Maharlika Fund, although it may not be there, although it may not be included, but they could. So here we see a lot of, well, as we said, not just semantics, but that's where the question marks go. Let's go back now to the other aspect.
It's a substantive issue, to put it mildly. It's a substantive issue because if you take a look at some of my previous interviews with radio and television, I made the point that perhaps the president can be given more time to assess the bill as presented to him and as passed by the Senate. Because even at that point when the Senate had passed it, sine die, right, there were still outstanding issues raised by various senators, particularly Senator Coco Pimentel and Senator Risa Hontiveros, Senator Chis Escudero, and even Senator Amy Marcos herself. Okay? But these were not addressed by the latest version of the Senate concurred by the Congress of the Philippines or the House of Representatives. But nonetheless, the president was given this bill for his signature. I mean, the president ought to have been given time to study the bill before he was asked to sign it.
A couple of days, perhaps, because that
Yeah,
Maharlika Fund was already signed into law.
yeah. Because their
Exactly.
deadline was basically the State of the Nation address.
Yes.
Yes, so that's something as dramatic as the MIF can be reported.
Exactly. So we're that's where we are, and that's exactly why we are presenting this to those who are listening to us, to the people in general, that
Yeah,
there really needs to have synchronicity as far
yes,
as the office of the president is concerned, the legislative department which comes up with all of these laws, and of course the executive departments individually and collectively. Let's go now to climate change, for instance. That is another aspect that early on we were discussing this with another friend of mine who also had the program earlier. We have had changes in the climate from the first day of the world.
yes,
So and then now we come up with the term, just because we have a vice president in America who won a Nobel Prize with an inconvenient truth and
yeah, Al
presented a
Gore.
lot of floods in Pakistan.
Yeah,
Although, so that was the picture and the video that he had, and that was also part of his book. And
yeah,
eventually he came up with another book, and it's the same thing repeatedly. But then again, that was where that phrase climate change came up, and everything is being blamed on climate change. But with so many precedents since, we were a republic, nothing has yet been done constructively insofar as floods and all of this dry spells are concerned. What has happened is land use has not been passed as yet. So we don't really have enough contiguous fields to plant main crops. But as you already cited, there is some kind of desync, if there is such a word, or the unsync, which is not synchronized as far as our mitigating policies are concerned. And now we have other policies coming up. So that's another problem that we have, sir.
yeah. Well, actually, we have been experiencing the manifestations of climate change in the Philippines. Rainfall, for example, is many times heavier today than they were in previous years. Dry spell are even more prolonged these days compared to many years ago. Okay, and we cannot stress enough that a concrete strategy for mitigating, for example, dry spell or an El Nino should actually be rolled out to the general public so that there is general ownership. People will buy in and they will cooperate with the rest of government or with the rest of society, because I don't think government can do it alone. Civil society has to be involved, and we hope that this government could succeed in implementing more robust solutions like adaptation of the so-called alternate wetting and drying method to use less water but with stable productivity levels. In other words, we don't we should be able to optimize whatever water is available to us by doing research and development on what kind of crops or products, agricultural products, can be sustained even with so little water or so much water during floods or during typhoons. And I hope you know the government will also be able to make use of the budget. I mean, since I was a little boy, whenever we would go to the movie house, I think we were paying 25 centavos for every movie
Yes,
ticket.
yes,
That's for
yes,
the flood tax.
yes.
But flood's still with us, you know. Um, I don't think we have mitigated the problem of floods in the Philippines. I mean, Falcon showed us that we can have more water than we deserve. You know, what happened to NLEX and SLEX in the last few days is
Yes.
a lesson in the failure of public policies to address the dictates, the imperatives of climate change. And I hope all of these allocations in the budget will be properly used. Okay, and I think if this can be done, I think we would have less problem adapting and coping with climate change.
Yes, sir. That really ought to be done yesterday, actually. So we
That's
see
right.
now the strange occurrences happening. Yes, of course. Climate change indeed is one of the things that have been happening not just here, but all over the world. But as
That's
you
right.
said, the DNR should also do a lot of review as far as many of its policies are concerned. We have a very active Secretary of Natural Resources. And you know,
Yeah,
one example was what happened to the oil spill. Without much fanfare, she was right there and
that's
immediately
right.
looked at the situation, and that was it. Natapos ka agad without,
Yeah.
media coming in with so much, anyway. But then again, here we are facing another problem. The cost of petrol is going to go up. I don't know, yesterday or tomorrow. My goodness, for diesel it's 360 and so forth, and all
That's
of this.
going to be
So
on Tuesday.
Tuesday,
That's
oh
going to
my
be on
dear,
Tuesday,
yeah.
Rita.
So this situation brings us again to the figures that they give us as far as inflation is concerned. It's going down, it's going up, it's going down, it's stabilizing, etc. And I don't seem to understand exactly where these percentages are going. So explain to us, is there such a situation as a manageable inflation rate or
Well,
something? Yeah, that's,
even when I was still at the BSP, we have been targeting about 2 to 4%
oh,
inflation rate.
oh,
Yes. In the
okay.
past, in the 1990s, uh, if we could do 6 to 8%, we were happy. Okay? But starting 2002, starting 2002, the BSP shifted to inflation targeting framework as monetary policy framework. And that would involve the BSP and the national government agreeing on the target. And
Uh-huh.
at the time, we were targeting a higher inflation target because we were coming from double digit
Mm-hmm.
during the 1980s and the 1990s. Remember that we had a balance of payments and debt problems in the 1980s when we had to declare a unilateral moratorium.
Yes,
And at that time, inflation was about 40 to
yes, yes,
45%. That was the time when Jobo bills were introduced by the then central bank.
exactly. Yeah.
Yes,
Uh-uh.
inflation rate was upwards of 40%. So market rates were as much as 45 to 50% in order to rein in inflation or inflationary expectations of the general public. Okay, now we had better inflation during the pandemic. Okay,
Really
in
now?
2019, for example, our inflation rate was only 2.4%.
Oh,
And then the pandemic year of 2020, also 2.4%. Now, when the government started lifting all of this quarantine
lockdowns
and
and
yes,
lockdowns. Yeah. Uh-huh.
lockdowns, there was a renewal of economic and business activities. So there was production, but there was also increased demand
Yeah.
from the general public. So inflation came up to around 3.9%. So 2019, 2020, 2021, we were within the inflation target of 2 to 4%. However, in 2022, when we had a resurgence in oil prices, also higher prices of rice and onions. Remember, onions hit
Yes,
750 pesos per kilo.
yes, yes.
Salt and other ordinary agricultural products reaching sky high. At that time, the average inflation rate was about 5.8%. Now, what is the recent inflation trends in 2023? The president was correct in saying that we hit a high of 8.7% in January 2023. And then from then on, it started coming down to 8.6 in February, 7.6 in March, and then 6.6 in April. May, it's 6.1, 5.4, and 4.7 in June and July. What's the reason for this decline? Well, one, oil prices have started coming down. Even if we see oil prices being adjusted by 3 pesos, 360, but compared to the high of 110, 105 about 2 or 3 years ago, they're still okay. No? However, we had problems again with climate change, and our food production was affected, and we even had this swine flu, no?
Yes.
And we had other issues in agricultural production, in logistics. So we had all of these problems with inflation. But now it's coming down. Among the other reasons for this moderation in inflation is base effects. Okay, base effects, because the first few months of 2022, inflation was rather low. Okay, so
Okay.
coming from a low base, and you have more or less the same price level, you would have a higher inflation rate. But the BSP is expecting that by the second half of 2023, you will have about a lower inflation rate, lower than probably 4 to 5%. So they're expecting probably about 5 to 5.4%. That's where inflation is coming from.
Okay, so that's actually the long answer to that question of a situation where we have a manageable inflation rate. Anyway, we see, as you describe it, sir, that external forces affect us. Likewise,
Yes.
now, like India's closing its rice exports, and then we
That's
have
right.
problems also from Vietnam, who's also having floods, etc., and all of this. So here we have, these are changes in the international system throughout the world, and we are affected by this. The war in Ukraine also affects us, and several other aspects. So will
Yes.
there be major changes that will otherwise affect us likewise, such as now we have the BRICS being pretty active insofar as being themselves away from the IMF and the World Bank. So we are not, none of our leaders have yet touched on this, either in the Senate or Congress. Even the president has not mentioned BRICS at all. Do we just leave it there as part of what's happening outside? But surely, like many other groupings, we will be affected by this. So China, for instance, is now using its own currency, even in Africa, several years back, about a decade or so. They build the railways and they're being paid in Chinese yuan, and then, of course, Russia likewise. So where are we as far as the world financial situation is concerned?
Well, people are talking about a new international monetary system using the Chinese yuan and the Russian ruble.
Are we ready for this?
No, if ever this is going to take off, which I doubt at this point, this would require de-dollarization. In other words, a shift away from the US dollar. This is the process of reducing an economy. For example, Philippine economy, Southeast Asia, the rest of Latin America and Europe away from the US dollar, or perhaps the second mostly used currency in the world, which is euro. I don't think this is going to take place pretty soon. In the course of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, Russia thought that it could sanction-proof itself against the US and the rest of its allies who opposed such an invasion, okay? By selling its oil using Russian ruble, okay? But and of course, depending also on China for trade and investment using Chinese yuan, because you see, Russian and Chinese central banks agreed just this year, I think February 2023, to set up a new yuan currency swap instrument. In other words, they will settle. Remember that Russia and China are big economies. Okay. In fact, China is the second largest economy in the world. So between China and Russia, they can do the trade and do their investment or payment system using their respective currencies, yuan and ruble. But the other aspect of that is having the BRICS version of the IMF SDR, or special drawing rights. In other words, if they can bring in the BRICS into their sphere of influence, meaning the currencies of Brazil, of course Russia is there, India and China is there, and South Africa. Well, it's possible. But then you have problems. What are the criteria for an internationalized currency like the US dollar and the euro? One is stability. In other words, people trust in this currency. You have a lot of it in the course of conducting global trade and investment. Number two is liquidity. In other words, if you need it, is it available? If you go to a bureau de change, can you find it? Well, you can find the US dollar, you can find the euro anywhere you go. But is that true for the Brazilian currency or the South African rand? I'm not sure. So this is something that will also be an issue against what Russia and China are trying to do. Of course, the Chinese yuan is already part of the SDR, or special drawing rights of the International Monetary Fund. The other point that Russia is doing is holding gold, no? And it has tripled since 2014. I think it's now holding about 150,000 gold bars, valued at more than $140 billion, mostly held in Russian vaults. But it remains isolated, no? The London Bullion Market Association cut off Russia. So if you are not within that association, you cannot trade your
Not
your
part
gold.
of the Bretton
So what's
Woods
the use
too,
of having your gold bullions, even if it is worth 140 billion? On top of that, because of the sanction by the US and the Western allies, those sympathetic to Russia were also taken off the SWIFT, which is the messaging and international or global payments system. So I'm not sure if we can envision the formation of a new international monetary system based on the Russian and the Chinese currencies at this point. Perhaps when in the future, when international trade and payments and investment tilt towards Russia and China and the other more sympathetic territories, perhaps then. But right now, as the IMF said, it is a more multipolar, it's a fragmented global economy that is more uncertain and more volatile.
But there's nothing like being prepared for this, because
Oh yeah,
apparently,
definitely.
yes, we have to touch on this in many ways as far as our economic and financial systems go. It might just be right next door. And
Yeah.
China is just
As far as
yeah.
the BSP is concerned, at least up to 2019, when I was still at the BSP, we have diversified our holdings
Mhm.
of various currencies, not only US dollar but
Yeah.
also euro, pound sterling, Japanese yen, including the Chinese yuan. Yeah.
Okay, so as we look forward to this, there really has to be more serious study. Another aspect, another concern would be digitalization.
Yeah.
President Marcos Jr. has mentioned this many times, and he feels that this will limit corruption, etc. and all. But our financial system is ready for this digitalization, although synchronizing this with our economic situation, synchronizing this with the MSMEs, and adapting to this likewise. You know how it is. Now
Yeah.
you can, I think even Pagcor is trying to find out if you could already make a bet in your cell phone or something like this. How far does this digitalization go insofar
Well,
as helping
yeah,
our economy?
digitalization is driven by the unavoidable shift to the so-called online and mobile banking using
Yes,
the
yes.
so-called fintech or financial technology. And actually, the pandemic actually incentivized the use of digital activities on the digital platform. The BSP itself is also pushing for this through their strategy called Digital Payment Transformation Roadmap. The the goal of the BSP is to cover 70% of adult Filipinos for financial inclusion. In other words, you have a lot of unbanked and underbanked Filipinos, and they promise to be, potential clients of digitalization, and that means market. And when you have bigger market, then you will have big money. And also, it attempts or it aims to cover 50% of all retail payments coursed through digital currencies. In other words, the pie is just too big for everyone. They can compete. It's a competitive market. It's a contestable market. So everyone has a share. They may compete, but they don't have to compete because the market is just too big. Some estimate put it at $50 billion. Some estimate at more than $100 billion. Now, digital banks actually offer a lot of things, no? Financial products and services that are processed end to end through a digital platform or electronic channels with no physical branches doing the business. It's a separate bank category. In fact, the BSP has came up with another separate classification of banks, and they call it digital banks. And so far, you have what? You have six digital banks already, no? Union Bank, Union Bank, Tonic, GoTime of Gokongwei, Maya Bank of PLDT, Pangilinan Group, Overseas Filipino Banks Incorporated, a subsidiary of Land Bank, and Uno Bank. And they've been, of course, they've been operating at a loss because obviously you need to invest in the digital platforms, in equipment, etc., etc. What made them think? Okay, one, the large number of unbanked and underbanked Filipinos. Two, low per capita income. That translates to potential markets. And more lending through digital channels. And three, English-speaking people. And given the character of Filipinos, our high propensity to spend by households in e-commerce. So that's a market for digital banks. And the advantage of digital banks is that it reduces cost because you don't have to maintain a lot of branches, number one. Number two, it increases the speed. I mean, since the pandemic and after my retirement, I've been doing all my banking
Yeah,
transactions
right.
using my mobile phone.
Yes,
And
yes.
it has no cost, except of course when you do either a PesoNet or PesoNet or the other one, which is also on real time. There is security and transparency. So better rates, lower fees, and better online services. Those are the advantages. But there are also risks.
I was about
And
to ask
the
that.
government,
Yes.
yeah,
Sounds good, but what's the downside of this? You have the
yeah.
scams.
Well, the downside, I think, are undeniable. Number one is data privacy. Okay. Number one. Number two, it can be used for money laundering.
Oh
And three,
dear.
yes, and
And
electronic
and
fraud.
not traceable?
Well, I'm sure it will be traceable, but
Difficult to
just like
trace.
the use of cryptocurrency, almost everything or everyone is anonymous. You are just doing by your mobile phone.
Yeah.
You are just identified by your number,
Yeah.
etc., etc. So BSP should also sustain providing a policy and regulatory environment that would allow both innovations to flourish while ensuring that controls and guardrails are in place.
Is it
The other
already in
issue, of
place? Is
course,
that
is
already in place or still to be done?
I think it's a work in progress.
Okay.
In other words, as we go along, the BSP is discovering some weaknesses in the system. And I
Yeah.
think that's natural. That's
Yeah.
something that is to
Because
be
it's something
expected
new.
when you are
Yes.
just
Yes.
rolling out something new. You see the weaknesses, the loopholes as you go along. The other issue is interoperability with banking systems.
Uh-huh.
How compatible are they with the existing infrastructure of various banks? Are
Yes.
they
Yes.
compatible? And it is also possible that higher ATMs may be incurred by the general public if the digital bank is not linked to ATMs to
Oh
accept
dear. Yeah. Yeah.
check deposits or dispenses cash.
Yeah.
Because even if you are digital, okay, and you transact all of your business activities digitally, sometimes people would still require cash. So unless you have a physical branch so that you can withdraw your money over the counter, or you also have your ATM to dispense cash, um, it cannot be considered to be providing an end-to-end solution to the normal customer requirements.
So it's like a
So
hybrid.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the problem
Yeah.
with some of these
Yeah. Hybrid
digital.
in such a way. You could use it, but at the same time, it is not well, it's not going to be the run of the mill thing. There will still be
That's
at
right.
least, yeah.
That's right. And nothing prevents some of these digital banks, okay, from having incorrect transactions
Oh
processing.
yes, right.
It happens.
Yes.
That happens. Now, if you have no branch to speak to a person, everything is done digitally or through digital platforms or digital channels, tayo, gusto natin may nakakausap no?
Yes, yes, of course.
Either through the phone o kaya
Face to face, yes. You go to the
sa
bank, yeah.
branch. But if you have no branch, because many of these digital banks do not have branches at all, okay? And what about the non-enforceability of contracts? I think that is also one potential problem. And
Exactly, yes.
unauthorized access, because even in the past, even NASA, even CIA, they have been hacked. So what will prevent digital banks from
Yes.
being hacked?
Just three words. Actually, when we had this big scam, when three words of "I love you," and you have the entire collapse of the of the intelligence system in
That's right.
America and all
That's
of
right.
this. You see, just three
Yeah.
words, and that's it. Well, it is something that we actually have today, and as you said, we are pretty good with using our mobile phones, and digitalization is really part of our lives already, but still not the kind of system that perhaps could go all the way down to the vendor that sits in the sidewalk selling his wear in the morning and coming back in the afternoon. And sometimes that is where we have the informal economy in the greater number, which
Yeah.
perhaps cannot just be systematized as far as digitalization is concerned. So we are in the best of times or the worst of times, as Charles Dickens would say it, or are we in the age of wisdom or the age of foolishness? Or do we have the spring of hope or the winter of our despair? So where are we in, sir?
Well, I think right now we are a work in progress.
We are on the
We are
second
a
year.
work in progress.
Okay, but we have been a
We
working.
experience all all kinds of seasons. Many of us do experience winter of discontent,
Yes,
but some of us would rather opt to be optimistic. So we have the optimism of summer, and of course, if our hope is always eternal, then we are in the spring of hope. But for some, especially the older ones, they may be in the autumn of their life.
yes.
Leaves are beginning to fall. I hope hope is not beginning to fall. But I think we are still a work in progress.
A work in progress,
Yes, a
yes.
work in progress, because we've been through a lot of presidencies. We've been through a lot of political leaderships, and we hope that despite everything, all of these challenges, both political, economic, and otherwise, we can still do something positive to turn around our economy, and also to improve or even transform our politics. Our people deserve more than what we are having today. Yeah.
That's very well said, sir. And precisely what we are trying to do through these chronicles is to come out with going back to the fundamentals, because
Yeah.
all the things that we're doing in our lives actually has reached a certain point where it is the quest for material things, the quest for wealth, the quest for power, the quest for ambitious positions and so forth. And we have lost track of the fundamentals. And that is where we have to synchronize our lives in a way. We talk of our finances, our economy. We talk about the governance of certain people, etc. But we have forgotten integrity, honesty, discipline, respect, and all of this. The most important of it all is being able to decipher within ourselves what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad. So even in our financial system and our quest to have a better life, we somehow forget what is actually within us, sir.
Yeah.
So, I
Well,
had, yes,
if you recall, the first Canadian to be the first governor of the Bank of England. Of course, Canada used to be a colony of
colony of England, yes.
yeah, Mark Carney. After his incumbency as governor of the Bank of England, he wrote a book called Values. Values. It's very interesting because he talked about three things there. But before that, societies or countries, okay, fail because they fail to put up appropriate institutions. Some time ago, two very well noted economists and historians, James Robinson and Darren Acemoglu of MIT, they came up with a book called Why Nations Fail. And the conclusion of that book is this: nations fail because they fail to establish or to put up appropriate institutions. And when we talk of institutions, we talk of political institutions, corporate governance, honest and open election, etc. Economic institutions, is the market competitive, contestable? Are there vested interests, etc.? cultural, education, religious institutions. So to them, nations fail because of their failure to put up appropriate institutions. And I think that should also apply to us. Have we put up the right political, economic, social, cultural institutions? That's why I said we are a work in progress because we need to put up all of those appropriate institutions. Now, going back to Mark Carney was also trying to answer that question. In answering that question, he thought of three things. No, one is market failure. Okay, market failure comes in when individual interests becomes more dominant than common interests.
Yes.
In other words,
Yes, an
the interest
individ-
of the general
It
public.
overwhelms the
interest of the
general
people.
interest. Yes.
That's right.
The
That's
word
right.
he used there was overwhelming.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's one of the keys why so many states actually fail. Unlike Singapore, for example, if you talk of the the three founders of Singapore, including of course Lee Kuan Yew, they were willing to subsume their self-interest in favor of the common interest. I mean, Lee Kuan Yew, when he died, was still occupying a very modest apartment up to the time of his death. But look at Singapore now. In 1965, Singapore had only $500 per capita income. Last year, 2022, Singapore had $82,000 per capita income. And that's the reason why Singapore, even if it's too small, even if it is in Southeast Asia, is considered to be first world. That's the first one, market failure. Second is the human nature, okay? For Mark Carney, Governor Mark Carney, he said that we tend to adhere to old beliefs. Old beliefs, even if they have been proven to be wrong. Okay? It gives me, what I think Albert Einstein was saying, doing the same thing and doing the same thing,
yes.
thinking that it will yield a different result. In our case, I think if we have proven one strategy to be useless and it doesn't work, I think we have to be more innovative. We have to change it.
Yes.
Now, for us, we have all of these old politicians, but we still expect something more positive to come out of them.
Exactly.
The same thing with the flood control. We have been doing all of these flood controls for many years, but until now, the flood waters are becoming higher and higher. Okay? And thirdly is the flattening of our own values. The flattening of our own values. We must have purpose. We must have perspective, clarity, competence, and of course, humility. Up to his last moment, Lee Kuan Yew was a humble man, saying that Singapore needs to reinvent itself. In our case, we are already talking of a new Philippines, but we haven't. Our new Philippines is limited to our new logo. We have to have a change of heart.
Exactly.
Because remember,
yes.
as we were saying, aside from institutions, aside from human values, I think we must go back to the fear of the Lord. Okay?
Precisely.
Because the Bible is very clear. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And this is sanctioned by government. First, in the 1987 Philippine Constitution, the preamble of the Philippine Constitution is very clear. We, the Filipino people, with the aid of our Almighty God. It's very clear, Almighty God. And by the way, modesty aside, when I was deputy governor of the BSP, we put up a Bible verse in our currencies.
Very good.
If you look at your currencies, from 20 pesos, 50, 100, 200, 500, and 1,000, there is a verse there the Tagalog or the Filipino version of Psalm 33:12. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, which means pinagpala ang bayan na ang Diyos ay ang Panginoon. If every one of us will have fear of the Lord and we have the integrity of our character, even if no one is looking, we will always adhere to what the Lord expects us to be. Ano yung gusto ng Panginoon? For us to be righteous, for us to be merciful, and for us to help the poor, to be merciful to the poor. And if we have that, I think we can be in the summer of hope, or in the spring of hope.
Exactly.
No longer a work in progress.
Precisely, no more. And that is the synchronicity, Sir DIWA GUINIGUNDO, that we are hoping to arrive at. That we are synchronized with the restoration of ourselves, our politics, our governance, our daily lives, with back to God. That
Amen
is
to
really so important. Yeah, in 2 programs prior to this, several weeks ago, that was how we were also mentioning the care of the soul and the fundamentals, the values that we have. You mentioned Singapore. I can go back also to Japan, for instance. The Bushido Code, which up to this day is already internalized in every of their lives. You know, all of this, loyalty, benevolence, etc., discipline, respect for elders, and so forth. They did not even mention God, but that was all the virtues that you had. We have this also, 2,500 years ago. A leader is not just to be good. A leader is to be virtuous.
Amen.
That
Amen.
perhaps
Because that
is,
is also scriptural roots, Rita. No? Remember that the word of the Lord also says, God sends rain both to the just and the unjust. Even if Japan does not subscribe to the same God of Israel that we do, because they're virtuous, they have good work ethics, they have discipline, they are very honest, they are also blessed.
yes.
They are also blessed, and
They
they have become one of the greatest nations in the world.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
we need this in our civil institutions. We need this in governance. We need this in our daily life. The synchronicity we should have in so far as bringing everything according to God. Sometimes we forget the most important word in all our undertakings, and that really is God should be in the center of our lives. So thank you
Yeah.
very much, sir, and I'm so glad that we have had this chance, and as I said, you will be a regular. I'll be calling on you again and again. But first,
Sure.
yes, thank you very much for having joined us. We have a number of persons have joined in. Hello, good evening, everyone. Respects, Mr. Governor. Hello, Ma'am Rita, and mabuhay. So, mabuhay to you too. This is from Joselita Cando Bederio, Virgilio Villanueva. Good afternoon, Sir DIWA GUINIGUNDO. This is from Virgilio Villanueva. Maite Baisa, hola. Jinky Bill, good evening. Watching from Germany. We have an inflation rate here of 6.9%. So here we have, I've been hearing in Germany that this month of August, a BRICS currency will be introduced that will be backed by gold. Knopfler to Labing, yes, good evening po, Ma'am Rita, watching in Riyadh, more power po. Elbow na ho ang economic team, Junior, kawawa ang pangkaraniwang Pilipino sa ginagawa ng economic team. Production ng pagkain, palakasin, tama ho sina Maestro, Ado Paglinawan, Bobby Tiglao, Mentong, Edka, patay tayo, lumayo sa kano, sumama tayo sa BRICS. Elkas, yes, good PM po, Ma'am Rita, watching here from Riyadh. So we have this comments also from the previous program, and then we have, hi John, we love you, Miss Rita, thank you very much. So again, thank you to our guest. We are actually worldwide, sir, as I've said earlier, whatever time zone is, and you'll be surprised to know that as this program is being replayed, sometimes we reach over 100,000 viewership. So thank you again, Sir DIWA GUINIGUNDO, for having joined us. God bless.
Pleasure, Rita.
Yes. This has been the Chronicles, and this is Rita Gadi.
Ba-ba-da-ba-dum, 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 bum bum bum.